Running backs performing early in their careers and wanting to receive a hefty contract extension is a tale as old as time, and rightfully so for them wanting to be compensated by the way. But today's NFL is a lot different than how the NFL used to be played, from both a strategic standpoint in terms of winning football games and in terms of how to construct an NFL roster. And again, both from a player personnel standpoint and a financial or salary cap standpoint. And the NFL is changing how football is going to be played, not just at the NFL level, but all the way down to the middle and high school levels, and the butterfly effect this is going to have. And there is a lot to dive into in today's video, and it goes back several years, and without further ado, let's begin. And we are starting today's video by discussing two players that are currently seeking long-term contracts, and they are Josh Jacobs of the Raiders and Saquon Barkley of the Giants. Both players heading into the 2022 season had questions to answer. The questions Josh Jacobs had to answer came down to whether or not he was good enough to continue to be a starter at the NFL level, or if he was going to be easily replaceable. Because through 3 years, this was a guy who rushed for 3,087 yards and 28 touchdowns, and while that's nothing to scoff at, it's not production that's unachievable by a committee of backs if the Raiders simply did not want to pay him after the 2022 season. Prior to last year, he never ran for 1,200 yards in a year, and when you take a running back in the first round of the draft, especially in today's NFL, you're drafting them to be a 1,400 or 1,500 yard back for the first few years of their career. At least that's the goal when you're on the clock. Josh answered all of these questions and then some, as he would go on to have a 2,000 total yard season and have 15 total touchdowns, and after doing so, he wants to be paid. And I am all for players getting the bag and to set their families up for generations of financial success, but NFL teams do not want to pay running backs top dollar, and this is what's going to create a butterfly effect. The questions Saquon had to answer were slightly different than Josh Jacobs, as heading into the season last year, Saquon had played in 44 of 65 total games for the Giants and was a great player in one season of his career, which was all the way back in his rookie season back in 2018. And given the Giants took him at number 2 back in 2018, there were a lot of disgruntled fans, and 2022 was very much a prove-it year for Saquon. And he did prove it, as he went on to have over 1,600 total yards of offense and added 2 touchdowns in their playoff win over the Vikings. But now it's time to pay their former number 2 overall pick, and they don't want to because of the risk involved with paying running backs. And over the past few years, we've seen teams pay their star running backs, and we've seen it not work out the way they intended to, time after time after time. And out of these teams that opted to pay their running backs, it's resulted in a grand total of 0 Super Bowls. Whether it was the Cowboys with Zeke Elliott, the Saints with Alvin Kamara, the Vikings with Dalvin Cook, or the Titans with Derrick Henry. And the Henry contract is a little different because of how good he has been for so long now, but with the others, it was a lot of play good on the rookie contract, play the first year of the new contract, maybe even the second year of the new contract at a high level if they're lucky, then due to the nature of the beast, which is the running back position, start to fizzle out and get to where we are today. And how all of this applies to running backs is there's going to be a point at the youth level where star running backs will look to transition to the receiver position if they seriously have a future in football for, well, really every reason. It's a lot less tolling on the body to play receiver and to catch 100 passes a year than it is to run the ball 250 or 300 times a season. The benefit of being a receiver from a financial perspective is enormous, as the highest paid receiver at the moment in terms of average annual value is Tyreek Hill, as he signed a 4-year, $120 million contract after being traded to the Dolphins last offseason, which equates to $30 million per year. The highest paid running back at the moment is Christian McCaffrey, who is making $16 million per year on average. And to give you an idea of receivers that are making around $16 million per year annually, which again is where the highest paid running back in the NFL is, we're talking about guys like a 31-year-old Tyler Lockett, Hunter Renfrow of the Raiders, and even Odell Beckham now of the Ravens. Now, if you go look at some of these guys' contracts and look at what they're making in 2023 specifically, it may differ, and Lockett's does, for example, but the point is, when it was time for Lockett to get paid, he signed a 4-year deal worth $69 million, nice, and in terms of what he brings to the table versus what someone like Saquon Barkley brings to the Giants, who, in theory, should be paid more relative to the team's success? Obviously, the answer is Saquon, and Saquon will be lucky to receive $13 or $14 million per year due to both his injury history and the position he plays. And this video isn't about me saying that running backs should be compensated the same as receivers, as much as it is acknowledging how significant of a wage gap there is between the positions, and how all of this goes back to the butterfly effect, and how all of this will trickle down to the youth level of football. If you legitimately have a future in football, or could, why would you play running back? And I think this is going to have a significant impact on the future of the running back position at the NFL level, because guys are going to opt for a safer position in receiver, and a position where they can also get a heftier contract as well. And not only is there a better chance to get paid at the receiver position, but there's a hell of a lot more roster spots than there is than running back. Most teams carry 6 receivers to 4 running backs, and when you do a pros versus cons list of playing each position, the pros heavily favor the receiver. And 6 spots to 4 spots may not seem like a lot, but if you multiply 2 by 32, that's 64 extra opportunities for guys to be a receiver than to be a running back. And because of all of this, I do think Bijan Robinson will prove to be one of the last truly elite running back prospects we see, because guys that are athletic enough to play both positions will opt to become a receiver and take their chances there instead of running back. There, of course, will be exceptions, as guys that are built like Nick Chubb or Derrick Henry do not have the agility and the sharpness to turn at the speed that a player like Justin Jefferson does when running a route, for example. But I seriously think we are headed back to a time in football where the power back will be dominant, and that's what teams are primarily going to use moving forward. And if you think about it from a perspective of how the league is going, why wouldn't you want to have a running back by committee approach where you essentially have 2 bigger backs along with a 3rd down back, or a receiving back that can run routes out of the backfield? Meaning over time there will be less guys that are do-it-all backs, because it's simpler to have one-role players at the running back position. Every team's goal is to be leading in the second half and to be able to run the clock out in the 4th quarter, and if you have the lead in the 4th quarter, hand the ball off to your 220 plus pound guys and let them eat up carries and ultimately the remaining time off the clock to seal a win. And this puts opposing defenses at an extreme disadvantage, because defenses are already lighter than they were 10 years ago. I watched a coaching clinic from Kirby Smart not too long ago, and Kirby is the head coach of the now 2-time defending champion Georgia Bulldogs, and what Kirby was saying made a tremendous amount of sense in how football has gone over the past decade. He was the Alabama defensive coordinator from 2008 to 2015, and a big point Kirby highlighted was the middle linebacker in the defense was former Patriots linebacker Dante Hightower, who was 6'2", 260 pounds, and would now be referred to as a throwback player. Kirby detailed the size difference between Hightower and Nakobe Dean, who was a starting linebacker on the first of Georgia's national championship teams, and a player who is 5'11" and nearly 230 pounds. This difference has taken place because of the passing game and quarterbacks being able to extend plays longer than ever before, and having guys like Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen make every throw in the book, meaning it requires more than just the secondary to stop the passing game. And how all of this goes back to the running back part is it greatly benefits backs like Nick Chubb and Derrick Henry, and these big beefy guys that are bigger than the linebackers they would be hitting in the hole. And with how contact heavy the running back position is, I think we're going to see a trend of taking the very skilled lighter guys and putting them at receiver, and if you want to get them the ball out of the backfield because they played running back in their youth, you very easily can just send them in motion and give them the ball on a jet sweep or a touch pass, or hand them the ball in motion while faking to the current running back in order to preserve the contact these guys' bodies are naturally going to take. And from a coaching perspective, it makes a lot of sense because you can still get a ton of production from your best players while keeping them as fresh as you can late in the year, because as we know, once December rolls around, nobody is truly 100%, but especially running backs, aka the guys you want to lean on when you're trying to preserve a lead. And if you want an example of this and of a player style who I think would opt to go to the receiver position if he were coming up in the rankings now, is Alvin Kamara. Alvin 100% has this skill set to be a receiver, but in the final 10 games of 2022, he averaged just 3.7 yards per carry and had just 546 yards rushing, which is not very good. He had 7 games where he averaged 3.8 yards per carry or less, and some less than stellar stat lines during this time, like a 9-carry 30-yard performance against the Ravens, or a 7-carry 13-yard game against the 49ers, or an 8-carry 26-yard game against the Steelers. Alvin is just 27 years old, but it's not a coincidence. He's averaged the lowest yards per carry of his career in back-to-back seasons. Alvin isn't the only back to decline over the past few years, but would you be surprised if I told you Curtis Samuel, Michael Gallup, or Jakobi Meyers would be in the top 6 for running back salaries, again based on average annual value, with an average of $11 and $11.5 million per year? Probably not, and what's unfortunate for running backs is for how talented these players are, they're not fairly compensated for how much production they bring to the table based on their position. And because of how frequently they get injured, I think a trend we will start to see is what the Seahawks did in 2022 and 2023 of the draft, and that's draft 2 very good running backs. Maybe not necessarily draft 2 second-round running backs in back-to-back years, but it wouldn't surprise me if teams start to have 2 third-round picks on their roster to ensure their backs stay as healthy as they can throughout the latter parts of the season. These guys play a position where they know heading in they're going to get beat up and they're going to get hit time after time after time. But over the past few years, there's always a holdout over a contract at the NFL level at the running back position. And if your career is on its tail end at 27 or 28 years old, like Ezekiel Elliott's is right now for example, would you rather make the transition while you're in high school and try and play as long as you can as a receiver and get $14 million guaranteed like Adam Thielen did this year at 33 years old, or be 5 years out of the league by the time you're 33 years old because you're yesterday's news? To me, the answer is obvious, and unless you're a 225 plus pound back that can take this type of beating longer than the 205 to 215 pound backs can, I think the way the NFL is going will force a lot of running backs to transition to wide receiver before they get to college. This topic was a little different than what we normally do on the channel, so I hope you enjoyed, and only about 26% of people watching are subscribed, so if you are enjoying, please like the video and subscribe to the channel as it only takes a second to do and makes a big difference. Please consider following on Twitter as well, and until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.